the lawsuit landed on my desk like a bomb wrapped in legal stationery. I was standing at the pass window of my flagship kitchen, watching the morning biscuit trays go in, when a man in a gray shirt walked through the dining room and asked politely if I was Athena Young. He handed me a thick envelope in front of 30 customers. My cook stopped. The line paused. I opened it right there because I had spent 15 years learning that delays only made things worse. Gordon and Carol Young, plaintiffs, versus Athena Young and RT Restaurant Group LLC. I read the first page standing at my own pass window, and I felt 17 again, standing in a hallway with grocery bags, hearing my mother's bright voice say, "It's just paperwork, sign it." Only this time, the paperwork had teeth. Unjust enrichment, constructive trust. My parents, who had thrown me out at 19 with 2 duffel bags and a laugh, were asking a judge to declare that 30% of everything I had built belonged to them, that the 14 restaurants I had grown from one food truck and a dead woman's notebook were really their legacy, loaned to me until I was old enough to pay it back. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked into my office, shut the door, and read the entire complaint twice. Then I took out my grandmother's blue notebook, the one with the soft cloth cover and the slanted handwriting, and I opened it to the chicken pot pie recipe where she had written in the margin, "Feed them first." She had sewn that notebook shut in 2009. She had hidden a letter inside the back cover with 3 lines. I had memorized like a prayer. Carol asked me twice to sign papers about my recipes. I never signed. If a paper ever says I did, it lies. And now, 16 years later, her son was standing in a courtroom holding a forged document that said the exact opposite. Welcome back to Com Drama Vault, where quiet strength finally gets its say. If a story about standing your ground keeps you company on long drives and quiet evenings, drop the word ledger in the comments below and subscribe, because this story starts with 2 duffel bags on a porch in June, and it ends with an envelope my mother will never forget. Let me take you back to Creston Falls, Ohio, 1995. I was 3 years old, and I was already learning how to count. I grew up in a house where love had a bookkeeping system. My mother, Carol Young, kept the grocery receipts taped to the refrigerator door, split 3 ways in blue ink. My share was circled. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a farm supply company, and she brought the ledgers home with her, not the paper ones, but the kind you carry in your chest. Every expense was tracked. Every kindness had a balance owed. Every gift arrived with interest. My father, Gordon Young, ran a farm equipment parts store on Route 9. By the time I was in middle school, the store was losing money, and the house could feel it. Dinner had one lesson, served nightly. Nobody eats for free in this house, Dad would say, and Mom would nod like he had quoted scripture. When I was 14, I asked for running shoes for track season. I got them. I also got a line in the notebook my mother kept in the kitchen drawer. Shoes advanced against future contribution. I did dishes at a diner on weekends at 15, and half of every paycheck went into what my parents called the family fund. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. Plenty of families ran tight in our town, and tight isn't the same as cruel. What made our house different wasn't the shortage of money, it was the accounting. Every kindness had a balance owed. Every gift arrived with interest. I learned to read the numbers on that refrigerator before I learned to ride a bike. And I learned what they meant. In this house, you were not a daughter. You were alone. But 6 blocks away on Maple Court, there was a yellow kitchen where none of those rules existed. And the woman who ran it was my father's own mother. My grandmother's name was Rosemary Young, and her kitchen smelled like brown butter and yeast 12 months a year. She had cooked for 40 years, church suppers, funeral lunches, and the lunch counter at Hardin's Drug downtown before it closed. Everything she knew lived in one place, a fat notebook with a blue cloth cover, its spine soft as an old dollar bill, every page crowded with her slanted handwriting. Biscuits on Saturday mornings, chicken pot pie when the first frost came. She never measured anything in front of me. She would press my hands into the dough and say, "There, that's what ready feels like." I was at her house every weekend from the time I was 10. My mother hated it. Mom called Grandma's kitchen that soup kitchen, and said a woman who gave away what she could sell had no business lecturing anyone about money. The two of them were polite, the way ice is polite, but Grandma fed everybody. Farmhands at the end of a season, the Kowalski kids whose father drank, a trucker who knocked on the wrong door once and left with a pie. I asked her one Saturday why she never charged. Since Mom said we were supposed to. She dusted the flour off her hands and looked at me the way you look at someone you're leaving something to. "We feed people because they're hungry," she said, "not because they can pay." I was 12. I thought it was a rule about pie. It took me 22 years in a courtroom to understand it was a rule about everything, and that my grandmother saw exactly what kind of house I was being raised in. Quietly, in her own way, she had already started getting me out. Grandma's heart started failing in the spring of 2009. When I was 16 going on 17 by that fall, she couldn't stand at the stove for more than a few minutes. So I went over after school and cooked while she directed from a kitchen chair like a small, flour-dusted general. Those were the best afternoons of my life, and I knew it even then. One evening in early November, I came in through the back door with groceries and heard my mother's voice from the front room. Mom almost never visited Maple Court. I stopped in the hallway. Mom was sitting beside Grandma's chair with a folder of papers on her lap, and her voice had the bright, patient tone she used on bank tellers. "Mom, it's just paperwork. Sign it, and I'll handle everything." There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice, thin as tissue but with iron underneath it. "I already signed everything I mean to sign." I was 17. I thought they were talking about insurance. I carried the groceries in. Mom snapped the folder shut, and nobody said another word about it. 6 weeks later, a few days before Christmas, Grandma put the blue notebook in my hands. She had wrapped it in a dish towel like something warm from the oven. "This is yours," she said. "Keep it where she can't." I remember laughing, a little nervous, and asking where she can't what. Grandma just patted my hands closed around the cover. She died on February 9, 2010. On a morning it snowed, at the funeral lunch, cooked by the church ladies from her own recipes. My mother touched my arm and said she would be happy to keep the notebook safe at our house. I told her I had already packed it away somewhere safe. It was the first time I ever lied to my mother. It would not be the last. 16 months later, in June of 2011, my father's store was dying, and everyone in the house knew it. I was 19. I had finished a year at the community college in Mansfield, then stopped because the money stopped. I was waiting tables full-time at a highway diner off Route 30. Clean paychecks, 40 hours, sometimes 50. One Sunday night, my parents called what my mother liked to call a family meeting, which meant the two of them on one side of the kitchen table and me on the other. Dad slid a folder across to me. Inside was a loan application from Harlan County Savings for $40,000 to refinance the store. His credit was wrecked. Mom's was tangled up with his. What the bank wanted was a cosigner with clean credit and steady income. And there I was, 19 years old, the only person at that table the bank would trust. Then Mom opened her notebook, the one from the kitchen drawer, and turned it around so I could see. 19 years, itemized, diapers, braces, the running shoes, room and board, built monthly, backdated to my 16th birthday. At the bottom, underlined twice, was the total, $16,000. "We're not asking you for money," she said in her bank teller voice. "We're asking you to stand behind this family the way this family stood behind you." I want to be clear about what I understood in that moment, because I understood it perfectly. I had seen the store's shelves. I had seen the empty parking lot. Co-signing wasn't a rescue, it was a burial. And the plot they had picked out was mine. If that store went down, and it was going down, the bank would come for the only person in the house with anything left to take. So I looked at my father across the table, and I said, "No." Dad closed the folder very slowly, and I knew exactly what was coming next. They gave me until Saturday. My mother stood in the kitchen with her arms folded while I packed, watching to make sure I didn't take anything she had bought, which by her ledger was everything. I left with 2 duffel bags of clothes, a shoebox of paperbacks, and my grandmother's blue notebook zipped inside my jacket where she couldn't see it. At the door, Mom didn't yell. Yelling wasn't her instrument. "When you're ready to contribute," she said, "you know the number." Like I was a customer with an unpaid invoice. My father was the one on the porch. It was the second Saturday in June. Warm. The neighbor's sprinkler ticking away like nothing was happening. Dad leaned against the railing with a look I still can't fully describe. Anger, sure, but under it something almost like relief. A man writing off a bad investment. "You'll be begging on the street," he said, and then he laughed. Not a movie villain laugh, a small, dry, certain laugh, the kind you give a joke you have already heard. "Give it 6 months." I slept in my 1998 Corolla for 11 nights, parked behind the Save-A-Lot where the security guard pretended not to see me. I washed my hair in a gas station sink. I hung my work shirts from the hook above the back seat so they wouldn't wrinkle. And in 11 days, I was not late to a single shift. You can check with anyone who worked that diner. It was the only thing I had left to control, so I controlled it at night. I would lie across the back seat and hear it on a loop, begging on the street, give it 6 months. I didn't have a plan yet. I had a notebook I couldn't stop reading by flashlight and a car that smelled like fryer oil. Then, on the 12th morning, somebody knocked on my window. It was my aunt, Patty. She was holding an envelope with a dead woman's handwriting on it. Patty is my dad's younger sister, a nurse over in Mansfield, and the only person at that funeral who had hugged me like she meant it. She bought me breakfast at the diner where I worked, sat me down in my own section, which felt ridiculous, and slid the envelope across the table. "Your grandmother gave me this in 2009, she said. Her instructions were exact. I was to hold it until you needed it most, and not one day sooner." I heard what happened. I'd say that's now. Inside was a bank document I had to read 3 times before my hands got the message. It was a payable on death account at First Merchant Bank. Opened in 2009, balance, $26,500. Beneficiary, Athena Young. Not my father, not my mother, me. Folded around it was a torn half sheet of paper, in that slanted handwriting I knew better than my own. For flour, rent, and a start. Not for anyone's debts are. Sat in the booth in my apron and cried for the first time since the porch. Big, ugly tears into a plate of eggs I had carried out myself. My grandmother had been dead 16 months, and she was still the only person taking care of me, and she had known. Read that note again. Not for anyone's debts. She had seen the loan folder coming before anyone opened it. Patty told me the rest. Grandma had set it up quietly, told no one but her, and made her swear to keep it away from my parents. So I did exactly what the note said. I didn't pay a cent toward anyone's ledger. I claimed the account with her death certificate, opened my own at a different bank 1 town over, rented a room above a hardware store for $280 a month, and started pricing used food trucks. Here's the part you should hold on to. 15 years later, my parents would stand in a courtroom and swear under oath that that money and everything it ever built had belonged to them all along. It took me 2 years of double shifts to feel brave enough to spend her money. In the spring of 2013, I found a retired step van at an auction in Marion. $11,000. Engine sound, kitchen gutted, repairs and equipment ran another $4,000. And permits and licensing took most of what was left, which tells you everything about my margin for error. There wasn't one. I painted it myself, a soft butter yellow, and lettered the side by hand over 3 nights. Rosemary's Table. The menu was 5 recipes from the Blue Notebook, and I want to be honest about the work because it matters later. I didn't photocopy my grandmother's pages and call it a business. Her recipes fed 8 people from a farmhouse stove. I rebuilt them for a 3-burner line and a lunch rush, reschooled, retimed, costed out to the penny, tested on my own paychecks until they came out right every single time. The biscuits alone took me 40 tries. Opening day was a Tuesday outside the county fairgrounds, and I sold 19 orders. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I drove back to my rented room that night with $61 in a cigar box, and I sat on the floor and laughed until the guy downstairs banged on his ceiling. Begging on the street. Well, I was standing on the street selling biscuits, and every one of them was mine. I taped my first dollar inside the cab, right above the visor, next to a card where I had copied her line in my own handwriting. We feed people because they're hungry, not because they can pay. It was a good summer. It was a good fall. And then came the winter of 2013, which very nearly finished what my parents had started. Nobody warns you that a food truck in an Ohio winter is a savings account with a hole in it. By January of 2014, the fair crowds were gone. The office parks were empty by 5, and my generator died on the coldest week of the year. 600. I did not have. I sat in the cab with the notebook and a calculator and did the arithmetic of quitting, rent, insurance, propane. 11 weeks of runway, maybe 12. There's a page in the Blue Notebook, dog-eared long before I owned it, where the chicken pot pie recipe lives. And under the ingredients in the margin, my grandmother had written a note to no one. For cold days, feed them first. I must have read that line 100 times before I actually heard it. Feed them first. So on a Thursday in February, I made 40 pot pies. Drove to the bus stop on Worcester Road, where the night shift crews from the packing plant waited in the dark, and gave them away. Every last one, free, with a paper card stapled to the box telling them where the truck parked. My last flour, my last butter, into the cold for nothing. My mother would have called it insanity, and for 6 days, it looked like she would have been right. On the 7th day, a Thursday, I came back to that bus stop, and there was a line. Plant workers, their wives. A foreman who ordered a dozen for his whole crew. Pie Thursday carried Rosemary's table through that winter and every winter after. And it never once felt like a marketing trick, because it wasn't one. It was her rule, working. Feed them first, and one gray afternoon that March, a man in a Carhartt jacket finished his pie, wiped his hands, and offered me something I hadn't let myself want. His name was Earl Dressler, and he had owned a diner on the east side of Columbus for 31 years. His knees were done. His kids were in Arizona, and he had been driving out to my truck on Thursdays for a month. "You cook like somebody taught you, right?" he said. "I want to retire without watching my place turn into a vape shop." He offered me a leasestone on the building. Seller-financed terms. A bank would never have given a woman with a food truck and no last name worth anything in that county. I signed the papers in March of 2015. 22 years old. Hands shaking so hard I dated the signature wrong and had to initial the fix. That first year, I worked hours I'm not proud of. Open at 6, close at 9, prepped till midnight, books till 2. I missed my best friend's wedding for a walk-in freezer failure. I canceled 3 dates with the same patient man until he stopped calling. And I told myself that was fine. That love was a line item I would get to later. In 2016, I hired Jess Moran to run the front of house. The best decision I ever made in that building. By fall, she knew me better than anyone alive. One night, after close, watching me recount a drawer that had already been counted twice, she leaned on the register and said, "You know what's weird? We're not broke. You run this place like you're paying off a debt nobody can see." I laughed it off. I actually said, "Old habit." I heard her. I hung her bell on the door. And I did not listen. 10 more years would pass before I understood exactly whose ledger I was still working off. That Christmas, a card came to the restaurant with a Creston Falls postmark. Let me pause here and ask you something. If somebody ever told you that you would fail and you used it as fuel instead, tell me in the comments where you were the day you decided to prove them wrong. I read every one. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the part where my parents come back into this story, we're almost there, and it's worse than you think. The envelope was addressed in my mother's handwriting, small, neat, slanted forward like it was in a hurry to collect. Inside was a Christmas card, snow on a covered bridge. And I stood by the register and felt 15 years old again before I even opened it. There was no letter, just her words under the printed greeting in blue ink. "We hear the restaurant is doing well. It would be nice if you remembered where you came from. Your father's shop closed because you refused to help." That was the whole message. 5 years of silence, and this was the flag my family planted. No, how are you? No address. No phone number. One line of credit taking and one line of blame folded into a 50-cent card. The shop had closed in 2012. I had heard from Patty and someone in Creston Falls that the failure had been quietly moved into my column of the ledger. The way you reclassify a bad debt. I sat in the office that night and wrote a reply. 6 pages. Everything: the porch, the car, the gas station sink, the 11 nights. Then I read it over and I heard how it sounded. Like an invoice. Like proof I was still doing math with them. I tore it up. Dropped it in the fryer grease bin, and made a decision that held for a decade. No contact. Not out of hate. Out of arithmetic. Every exchange with my mother had a price, and I had finally stopped being able to afford her. I kept the card though. I couldn't tell you why at the time. Now I can. Because 10 years later, I would see that same neat, forward slanted handwriting in a courthouse. Filing on a page that carried the signature of a woman who had been dead for 16 years. Here's the next 10 years, at a pace my banker would appreciate. In 2016, I opened the second location in Westerville in a dead pizza place with good bones. By 2018, there were 4. And I stopped carrying the schedule for every store in my head. Which felt like losing a tooth. The pandemic almost took all of it, and then it didn't, because we pivoted to family meal boxes, pot pies, by the dozen on porches across 3 counties. And it turns out that in the worst year anyone could remember, people wanted exactly what a woman born in 1938 knew how to make. By 2021, there were 8. By 2024, 12. Today, there are 14 Rosemary's tables around central Ohio, about 340 people on payroll, and a suspended meal board by every register. You buy a meal for a stranger, we pin the ticket. Anyone who needs it takes it. No questions. Corporate would call it brand identity. It's not. It's a rule about pie. In 2023, I did the thing I had promised myself in that cold food truck. I bought Earl's building outright, paid off the seller financing 3 years early, and mailed him a photo of the deed with a pot pie. He mailed back a napkin that said, "Proud of you, kid." I framed the napkin. I want you to notice what my life was by early 2026. Busy, useful, full of people I chose. And still, every January, I ran the whole company's numbers alone, at night twice. A woman with 340 employees, still counting like somebody was going to check her math. Then, in March of 2026, a magazine called, and my quiet, careful 15-year piece ended the week that story ran. Ohio Business Monthly wanted a profile for their spring issue. 14 restaurants, 1 grandmother's notebook. That was the actual headline. I said yes for the hiring push. And honestly, some for her. Rosemary Young's name in print. Her food called an institution 32 years after the lunch. Counter closed, the photographer posed me at the flagship's pass window, holding the blue notebook. And against every private instinct I have, I let them shoot it open. 1 biscuit-stained page filling half the frame with her slanted script. A Columbus station picked it up and ran 2 minutes on the evening news. Me at the stove, saying her line about hungry people. The anchor doing the wistful head tilt. The piece traveled. It got shared in church Facebook groups and small-town news pages all over the state, which is a polite way of saying it reached Creston Falls by dinnertime. Jess watched the segment on her phone at the bar and grinned at me over the rim of it. Hope your family doesn't watch television. We laughed. I want that on the record. We laughed. 2 weeks later, my phone would ring with a number I hadn't seen in 15 years. And no part of it would be funny. But before that call ever came, the notebook itself had one more thing to tell me. Something my grandmother had hidden so well and so deliberately that it took a stranger with a needle and thread to find it. All that filming had been rough on an old book. The spine was shedding threads. 2 signatures of pages had come loose. And the thought of losing it scared me more than any health inspection ever had. So I took it to a book conservator in German Village. A precise woman named Ruth, who handled it like a surgeon. She called me 4 days later, and her voice had a strange care in it. "Ms. Young, did you know there's something inside the back cover?" The backboard was thicker than the front, she said. Under the cloth, stitched flat against the cardboard, stitched with thread by hand, was a manila envelope, soft with age. On the front, in that handwriting, "For the day they come for this." I stood in Ruth's shop and opened it with her letter knife, and my grandmother spoke to me from 16 years away. 1 page, dated October 2009, the same fall I had stood in her hallway and heard my mother's bright voice say, "It's just paperwork." The letter was short. It said where to find her handwriting if anyone ever questioned what was hers. The letters she had mailed Patty every month for 20 years, her signature card at First Merchant from 2008, the sign-in ledgers from the church kitchen, a dead woman's map of her own hand, and then at the bottom, 3 lines I have memorized like a prayer. Carol asked me twice to sign papers about my recipes. I never signed. If a paper ever says I did, it lies. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat, like a living thing. I didn't understand yet. There was no lawsuit, no fight, nothing but a magazine article and a spring evening. I put it in the safe at the flagship and told exactly one person. No one. 9 days later, standing in that same kitchen, I watched my phone light up with a word I had deleted from my contacts a decade ago. Mom. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered it, standing at the pass window because some part of me wanted to be near her notebook when I heard my mother's voice again. "No, hello. No, how are you?" Carol Young opened with a number the way other people open with a name. "We've seen the article," she said. "Athena, we've talked to someone, and we think 30% is fair." I actually looked at the phone the way people do in movies. "Fair," I said. "Your father's mother's recipes built every one of those kitchens." Rosemary was a young. "Her food belongs to this family, and you've been selling it for 13 years without so much as a phone call." I kept my voice level, which I had learned in the worst kitchen of my life. "Hers, you put me on the street with 2 bags, I said. There wasn't a phone to call." She didn't miss a beat. She never misses a beat. "We taught you independence. Look what you did with it, and this is how you repay it." There it was. Repay. 34 years old. 14 restaurants, and my mother could still find the ledger in any sentence. She talked for 2 more minutes about family, about what people in town were saying, about how her and Dad's retirement had been stolen by that store, how I owed them a legacy. And then she said the line I already told you about. The one I think she had rehearsed. "Everything you are, you owe to this family." I looked down the line of my kitchen. My cooks, my burners, my grandmother's biscuits, browning in a convection oven she never lived to see. No, I said. Everything I am. Someone in this family gave me free. There's a difference, Mom. You've just never once been on the right side of it. I hung up. My hands were steady. The following Friday, a man in a gray shirt walked into the flagship at lunch rush and handed me a thick envelope in front of a full dining room. Gordon and Carol Young, plaintiffs, versus Athena Young and RT Restaurant Group, LLC, I read. The complaint that night at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I never touched. The claims were unjust enrichment and constructive trust. My parents were asking a judge to declare that 30% of everything I owned had really been theirs all along. And the spine of the whole thing. Exhibit A was a document I had never seen or heard of in my life. A codicil, an amendment to my grandmother's will, dated November 3, 2009, in which Rosemary Young supposedly left all recipes, notebooks, and culinary property to her son, Gordon, recently discovered. The filing said, in a box of the deceased belongings. I read that date 3 times. November 2009. The same month I stood in a hallway with grocery bags and heard, "It's just paperwork. Sign it." The same fall my grandmother sat down and sewed a map into a book cover. The Creston Falls paper ran it by Sunday. Local restaurant owner sued by own parents over late grandmother's recipes. And the comment section did what comment sections do. Half the town called my parents disgraceful. The other half knew better. Kids today get famous and forget who raised them. One woman wrote, she probably did take what wasn't hers. My father's old poker buddy called me a thief with a nice smile. I sat in my office reading strangers debate whether I was a monster. And the same word kept surfacing from 15 years down. Begging. He had promised me the street, and here it was at last. Except it wasn't me on the curb, asking strangers for something I hadn't earned. Monday morning, I called the best probate litigator in Columbus. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and her office had no waiting room music, which told me I had chosen right. But before I ever reached her conference room, the lawsuit had already started collecting its rent. First merchant froze the construction draw on restaurant number 15. Pending litigation. Standard policy, nothing personal, a phrase I heard 4 times in one phone call. The Zanesville build-out stopped mid-drywall. 2 of my best general managers quietly updated their resumes. Jess talked one of them off the ledge in the walk-in, and I pretended not to know. That's the part nobody tells you about a nuisance lawsuit. It doesn't have to win to cost you. It just has to exist. Dana read the complaint in about 10 minutes. Flat-faced, then sat it down and gave me the cleanest legal analysis I have ever paid for. Weak law, she said. Recipes aren't property you can copyright. And a 16-year-old codicil surfacing 3 weeks after you're on television is the kind of coincidence judges notice. This is an expensive nuisance. They're not betting on winning, Ms. Young. They're betting you'll pay to make it stop. Then she pulled the copy of Exhibit A toward her and looked at the signature for a long, quiet moment, long enough that I stopped breathing a little. Rosemary Young, in looping script above a witness line I couldn't read. Something wrong? I asked. Dana didn't answer right away. She turned the page 90 degrees, then back, like a jeweler with a stone she didn't trust, and then my lawyer asked me the strangest question of that entire strange spring. Your grandmother, did she send Christmas cards? I didn't understand the question yet, and Dana, being Dana, wouldn't explain until she had more than a hunch. First, we went digging. The probate file from 2010 was still sitting in the Harlan County Courthouse, and it told a simple story. My grandmother's estate had been small and clean. The house on Maple Court sold and split between Dad and Patty. Her furniture and kitchen equipment donated to the church. A plain 2-page will from 1998, properly witnessed, properly filed, and nowhere, not in the will, not in the inventory, not in one line of 16-year-old paperwork, any mention of a codicil, of recipes, of culinary property, anything. To get their new document into that closed estate. My parents' lawyer had filed a motion to reopen it, claiming the codicil was only just found last fall in a box in their attic. After 16 years, Dana said, courts allow it rarely, but the judge will want to know where it's been, and so do I. Then I did the thing I had been circling for a week. I opened my bag and put my grandmother's sewn-in envelope on Dana's desk, the letter, the list, the 3 lines at the bottom. Dana read it twice. My lawyer is not a sentimental woman. She bills in 6-minute increments, and I have never heard her raise her voice. But when she got to, if a paper ever says I did, it lies. She set the page down with 2 fingers. Gently, like it was evidence in China at the same time. "Ms. Young," she said, "your grandmother is about to testify." Then she picked up a legal pad and started a list of her own. We were going to need all of my grandmother's handwriting, every letter, every ledger, every signature this woman left behind on God's green earth, so we went and gathered her, piece by piece. Patty met us at her kitchen table in Mansfield with a fireproof box she had kept for 16 years. Inside were the letters Rosemary had written her every month from 1990 until 3 months before she died, hundreds of them, dated, signed, postmarked. The church kitchen still had its sign-in ledgers, her name in the margin of 2 decades of funeral lunches. First Merchant, under subpoena, produced her signature card from 2008. By the end of the week, Dana's paralegal had built a timeline of my grandmother's handwriting that ran 20 years deep, and I had spent 3 evenings reading a dead woman's mail with my aunt, laughing and wrecked by turns. It was on the last of those evenings that Patty told me the thing I didn't want to hear. "You should know something about Carol," she said. Not kindly, not unkindly. "When your mother was 9, the sheriff put her family's furniture on the lawn, everything they owned on the grass with the neighbors watching. She stood on the sidewalk in her school clothes guarding a lamp. I said nothing. She grew up believing the only things that can't be taken from you are the things with your name on paper. Your grandmother saw it in her the first week your dad brought her home. That's why Rosemary never let Carol near her papers, not out of spite. She just knew what hunger looks like when it grows up." I sat with that for a long moment, and something in my chest moved about an inch. For a 9-year-old on a sidewalk guarding a lamp, I would have opened every register I own. Then I remembered 11 nights in a Corolla behind the Save-A-Lot, arranged by the woman that little girl became. Understanding is not the same as forgiveness. I loaded the letters into my trunk like a casserole for a wake. Now all we needed was one person qualified to make 200 letters. Answer a single question. Part 20. Her name was Dr. Meredith Oak, a board-certified forensic document examiner, who had spent 19 years telling courts whether paper was lying. She took the codicil, the exemplars, and 3 weeks, then she called us in, set 2 images side by side on a monitor, and taught me more about my mother in 10 minutes than I had learned in 34 years. "No 2 genuine signatures are identical," she said. "Not from the same hand. Not on the same day. Not ever. Your hand is a living thing. It varies." She overlaid the 2 images. "The signature on this codicil is a .4 match to one specific known signature, the one on this Christmas card your grandmother mailed in 2003. Line weight, letter spacing, the break in the are identical. That doesn't happen in nature, Ms. Young. That happens on a light table with patience." Under magnification, she showed us the rest. Hesitation marks where a pen had crawled instead of flowed, faint impressions of pencil beneath the ink, the fossil of a tracing. And the codicils to witnesses told their own story. One was a neighbor of my grandmother's, who, the county's own records showed, had died in 2007, 2 years before the date he supposedly watched her sign. The other was Sharon Pugh, my mother's card game friend of 30 years. I stared at the overlay a long time. The 2 signatures nested inside each other, like one ghost wearing another. The 2003 Christmas card, Patty confirmed, had spent the last 2 decades in a photo album in my parents' living room. My mother hadn't found my grandmother's signature. She had farmed it, grown a dead woman's hand in a garden of old holiday mail. Dana let me sit with it. Then said the sentence that turned the war. "There's one complication. The filing says your father will testify the codicil is genuine, which means before we use this, we're going to find out what Gordon Young actually knows." We deposed my father on a Tuesday in July, in Dana's conference room with a court reporter, whose keyboard clicked like a slow clock. 15 years. And there he was across a table again, smaller than the man on the porch. Hands like old rope, 70% of his hair gone gray, and the rest surrendering. He wouldn't look at me. Dana walked him through it gently, and his story came out smooth because he believed every word of it. Carol had been cleaning out the attic last fall. Carol found a box of his mother's things. Carol brought him the codicil at the kitchen table, and he had recognized his mother's signature at the bottom, the way you recognize a voice on the phone. When he said that part, something came into his face I hadn't expected and couldn't unsee. Pride. Relief. Even at 65 years old. Here at last was a piece of paper saying his mother, who had cooked for the whole county but somehow never for his ambitions, who had skipped his store's grand opening for a church funeral lunch, who had left her only treasure to his teenage daughter, had chosen him. After all, he didn't just believe the codicil was real, he needed it to be. I watched my father across that table, and understood, with a coldness that had nothing to do with anger, exactly what I was holding. He didn't know, which meant the truth wouldn't just win my case. It would walk into that man's house, sit down at his kitchen table, and take his wife and his mother from him in the same afternoon, and I would be the one who sent it. That night, an email arrived from my parents' lawyer. Subject line, settlement proposal. I remember thinking before I opened it, whatever this is, it's a door. What I didn't expect was how badly part of me would want to walk through it. The offer was almost gentle, which is how you know a lawyer wrote it and a mother approved it. My parents would dismiss the entire lawsuit, every claim gone by Friday, in exchange for $200,000. The letter called it a goodwill resolution, honoring the family legacy. There would be a mutual confidentiality agreement. And then this sentence, which I have kept. With this behind us, your parents are hopeful the family can finally begin healing. Your parents are old. Athena Carroll had added through counsel. This is your chance to make things right. Even her mercy came with an invoice. Jess read it in my office and said what any sane friend would pay it. It's disgusting, and it's cheaper than a year of this. The bank releases the loan. The managers stay. Zanesville opens by spring. $200,000 to make your parents permanently go away is the best deal you'll ever be offered. Dana was Dana. Business-wise, you'd be done by Friday. Everything else about it, only you can wait. Here's what I want you to understand about that night. Because it's the part of this story I'm least proud of, and the part that matters most. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, and I very nearly paid. I could afford it. Peace. A signature. An open bank line? And a mother who might the old hope surfaced like a body might finally say something kind about what I had built. All I had to do was pay one last bill I didn't owe, and keep one small secret about one forged signature. Forever. Then I took out my grandmother's letter and read the bottom 3 lines again. Carol asked me twice. I never signed. If a paper ever says I did, it lies. She hadn't asked me to win. She had asked me not to let the lie stand. In the morning, I called Dana and kept it short. File the report. Dana didn't ask if I was sure. She had been waiting with her hand on the lever. By that afternoon, Dr. O'Coffer's findings were in the court file, a public record available to any clerk, reporter, or curious neighbor in Harland County, along with our motion for sanctions for filing a claim built on a manufactured document, and a notice that we would be deposing Carol Young about the codicil's discovery under oath the following Tuesday. I want to be honest about what I knew when I gave that instruction. Because I knew everything. I knew the report could never be unsealed from the world once it entered it. I knew my father would read it or hear it or have it read to him by a reporter on his own porch. I knew that whatever was left of my parents' 42-year marriage was standing in the road, and I had just released the truck. There are people who will tell you I had no choice, that it was just litigation strategy. That's not true, and I won't hide behind it. I had a door marked $200,000 in silence, and I closed it myself with my own hand on purpose. What I did next was smaller. I texted my Aunt Patty, whom my father had barely spoken to in years, and told her only this. Be near your brother next week. He's going to need somebody who isn't Carol. Then I went back to work, because Bread doesn't care about your subpoenas. Carol Young's deposition was set for 9 in the morning, on the last Tuesday of July. She walked into that conference room with fresh lipstick and the smile of a woman who still believed she was holding the ledger. She had no idea she was the entry. She wore the gray blazer she saves for banks and funerals. For 40 minutes, Dana asked soft, patient questions, and my mother answered them in her bright teller's voice. And I sat very still at the end of the table and watched her build her own scaffold. Where was the box found? The attic under the Christmas decorations. When? October last fall. Who was present? She and Gordon. Had she ever discussed the recipes with Rosemary before her death? Here, my mother allowed herself a small, wounded pause. Rosemary and I weren't close. She wasn't an easy woman, but she knew what family means. Whatever else, she knew the recipes belonged with the family. The court reporter's keys ticked. Dana nodded along like a woman doing a crossword she had already solved, and then she opened her folder. Mrs. Young, I'm handing you what's been marked Exhibit 12. A Christmas card postmarked December 2003, from Rosemary Young to Patricia Reyes. Do you recognize the signature? My mother glanced at it. It's Rosemary's. It is, Dana said. Now, Exhibit 13. And she laid the transparency over the codicil signature on signature, and slid it across the table. In the fluorescent light, you could see it plainly. 2 names written 6 years apart. nested into each other like a single ghost. Can you explain to me, Mrs. Young, how your mother-in-law signed her name twice, 6 years apart, identically to the width of a penstroke? I have been in walk-in freezers warmer than that room became. My mother did not look at the overlay. She looked at me past Dana, past her own lawyer, down the length of the table. And what was in her face was not guilt, and it was not fear. It was fury, the pure, bewildered fury of a bookkeeper whose numbers have stopped obeying her. You ungrateful, she started, and her lawyer's hand closed on her arm, and he asked for a recess in a voice that had gone a little gray. Chairs scraped, people stood, and in the noise of it, my father, who had come as a plaintiff and sat all morning by the window silent, reached across the abandoned table and picked up the overlay with both hands, carefully, the way you pick up a photograph of someone you had buried. He held it up to the light for a long time, then he turned to my mother and asked her very quietly, "Carol, where did you get my mother's Christmas card?" Nobody answered him. The room emptied into the hallway, and that hallway is where my story was always going to be decided, not by the overlay, but by what I did next. Their lawyer came to us within the hour, quiet as a man diffusing something. The lawsuit would be dismissed immediately with prejudice gone forever. They would cover every dollar of my legal fees. In exchange, the expert report withdrawn from the file, the record sealed, mutual confidentiality. His hand made a small smoothing motion. What's in that folder stays in this building. No one outside this room ever needs to know. And there it was, laid out on a hallway bench. Everything I had wanted since the day the process server interrupted my lunch rush. The case dead. The bank unfrozen, Zanesville open by spring. My parents' marriage left standing. My father left with his merciful lie. The town left with a boring story about a family that settled a misunderstanding. All I had to do was help bury my grandmother's signature a second time. Dana laid out my options in her flat, kind way. Take the seal, and it ends now. Clean. Refuse, and the truth stays public forever. And she reminded me of one more thing. The report was strong enough to refer for criminal charges. Forgery. My call. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see my father alone at the long table, the overlay still in his hands, reading it over and over like a man trying to translate his own life. 65 years old, hungry his whole life for one sentence from his mother, and holding proof that the only version of it he had ever gotten was counterfeit. I heard my grandmother then, clear as a Saturday morning. We feed people because they're hungry. The truth was the only thing I had left to set in front of him, and it was going to taste like ash, and it was still food. I turned back to Dana and kept my voice kitchen calm. No seal, no confidentiality, the report stays in the record. All of it. Dismissal with prejudice, and they pay your fees, and we're done. I took a breath, and no criminal referral. I'm not sending my mother to be prosecuted. I'm done collecting. That's the whole point. Somebody in this family has to be the first one to stop collecting. They took the deal, because there was nothing left to take. But before the papers were even drawn, my father did something no one asked him to do. He came back into the conference room, picked up a pen, and withdrew as a plaintiff on the spot, his own separate line, his own signature, his hand shaking so hard the court reporter looked away to give him privacy. My mother hissed his name once, Gordon, like a command to a dog that had always come. He didn't look at her. On his way out, he stopped in front of me. Up close, he smelled like the store used to machine oil and peppermint, and for a second, I was 9 years old handing him wrenches. I said you'd beg, he said. His voice was gravel. I know, I said. He looked at the floor, then made himself look at me, and I watched it cost him. You never did. That was all of it. No apology. Men like my father weren't issued the parts for one, but it was the first time in his life he had ever looked at me like a person instead of a balance. Then he walked past his wife of 42 years without turning his head, and Patty was waiting in the lobby exactly where I had asked her to be. The court dismissed the case with prejudice in August and ordered my parents to pay my fees. The Creston Falls paper ran the forensic report on the front page, because of course it did. And I went back to my kitchens and waited for the thing I somehow knew was still coming. It took 3 weeks. My phone rang on a Tuesday before the morning shift. Same number as April. Same voice. Same arithmetic. Your father moved out, my mother said instead of hello. He's at Patty's. He filed papers last week. 42 years, Athena. And he filed papers. She waited for me to say something. I stood at the flagship's pass window in the 6 o'clock quiet, watching the first trays of biscuits go in, and said nothing at all. So she continued, and her voice found its old rail the way a stream finds a ditch. I hope you're satisfied. This lawsuit destroyed our family. The lawyers took everything. The town won't look at us, at me. And you have 14 restaurants, and we have nothing. The least you can do. And I closed my eyes because I knew the shape of the sentence before it arrived. Is acknowledge that we still deserve something. We raised you. 30% of nothing is nothing. Athena, be reasonable. There it was. The last page of the ledger. Her husband gone. Her name in the newspaper next to the word forged. And my mother was still at her kitchen table, billing me. I want to tell you, I felt anger. But that's not what was in my chest. What I felt was finished. The specific bone quiet finished you feel when a long shift ends and the last burner clicks off. Everything I had ever needed to say to my mother, I had already said in a court file, except for one thing, and it was already in the mail. I had sent it the day the dismissal came through. Certified, addressed in my own handwriting to the house I hadn't entered in 15 years. Mom, I said, and my voice came out kitchen calm. I said the only thing there was left to say. Check your mailbox. Then I hung up, turned my phone face down on the pass, and went to pull the biscuits. Here is what was waiting in the mailbox on the house in Creston Falls. Not a check, not shares, not a lawyer's letter. She would have almost preferred one. Because a lawyer's letter is at least a transaction. Inside a plain manila envelope were 3 things. First, a complete copy of Dr. Okafor's report, every page because my mother had never actually read it. And the truth was, the one debt I genuinely owed her. Second, a photocopy of my grandmother's sewn letter with the bottom lines that will outlive all of us. Carol asked me twice to sign papers about my recipes. I never signed. If a paper ever says I did, it lies. She deserved to know that the woman she had traced off a Christmas card had seen her coming 16 years ago, and had answered her patiently from the grave. And third, on top of the stack, a single recipe card in my own handwriting, chicken pot pie, her copy, complete, nothing held back, the crust, the timing, the margin note, and all, because one Christmas, back when I was small and the world was different, my mother had eaten my grandmother's pot pie at that yellow kitchen table and said, without an invoice attached, "That's wonderful." The only free thing I ever heard her give Rosemary Young. At the bottom of the card, under the recipe, I wrote what I had finally figured out, and I kept it short, no invoice. It was never for sale, it was always free. That was the part you never understood. My mother has not called me since. But Patty stopped by the house that fall to collect the last of my father's tools, and she told me what she saw in that kitchen. The refrigerator door was bare, no receipts, no blue ink, nothing except one thing, pinned dead center with a magnet, a recipe card for chicken pot pie. The divorce went through in the winter. My father lives in Patty's spare room now, and once a month he drives to the flagship, sits at the counter like any other customer, and orders the pot pie. He pays every time. I've told him it's free. He leaves the money under the plate anyway, and I've stopped fighting it because I finally understand what it is. It's the only language he has, and he is using it to say something he can't. We don't talk much. We start with silence and work up from there. And some months, that's a kind of peace. The bank released the loan. Zanesville opened the week before Thanksgiving, with a line out the door. And on the first Sunday of every month now, at all 14 Rosemary's tables, we run what the staff named Rosemary Sunday. The long table down the middle. No register, no tickets. Anyone who's hungry, you should see it. Plant workers and retirees and single mothers and one very dignified old farmer who always wears a tie to eat for free. This past Sunday, I was in the flagship kitchen teaching biscuits to my newest hire, Tyler, 19 years old, sleeping on a cousin's couch since his folks put him out in March. His first batch came out like hockey pucks, and he braced like he was waiting for a bill. I pressed his hands into the next batch of dough the way she once pressed mine. We feed people because they're hungry, I told him, not because they can pay. His shoulders came down an inch. Somewhere, a ledger closed. Here's what my grandmother knew all along. Love that keeps a ledger always ends up in court, but love given freely keeps feeding people long after you're gone. That's my story. 2 duffel bags on a June porch, a letter sewn into a book cover, and a mailbox with no check in it. If someone in your life ever made you feel like a debt instead of a daughter, take this as your sign. The only thing you truly owe anyone is the truth. Share this with someone who needed to hear it. Drop a comment telling me where you were when you decided to prove them wrong. And if you believe that love should never come with an invoice, subscribe to Calm Drama Vault. There's a new story every week about the quiet moment someone finally stops shrinking, and one of them might sound like yours. This story is a dramatized narrative created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real events or persons is coincidental. Sometimes people lose access to you not because you stopped mattering, but because you finally understood that love should never require you to accept endless harm.